Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Good morning. Good morning. So last week we gave an introduction to the discourse. I think it's worth listening to if you weren't here. We gave an introduction to prayer overall and where this particular discourse comes from, but we're just going to jump right in. Okay, chapter 1. Everybody should have a copy. I want to remind everybody that we begin this Tuesday morning and Tuesday evening the new JLI course, Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa. It's one of the favorite courses that I've taught, so hopefully you'll join. And let's get right into it. Ahuvai achai v'reai, my beloved brethren and friends, halayadaitem im leishemaitem. Surely you are familiar with the teaching. Harbe inyani hizbaininus, with the many contemplative themes. So as we mentioned, prayer is a focus of meditation, right? It's not just a bunch of words. It's an opportunity for us to connect deeply to spiritual ideas, to connect with God, and then to translate that down into our personal transformation, correcting behaviors that need correcting character that needs correcting, and strengthening the positive dimensions of who we are. So what are some of the meditations that one contemplates during prayer? Both the meditation about how God fills the world. This is an idea that is accessible to everybody. One has the ability to contemplate these teachings in a very thorough manner. Not just in the godly dimension, but also in the bodily dimension. In other words, the body, who we know is called the animal soul, the body has the ability to comprehend divine ideas. Gam b'seichel hativi de nefesh habahamis, also in the natural soul of the animal soul. We discussed last week that what is mimali kolam? What does it mean that God fills the world? It means that God takes into consideration each and every creation, nurtures it with the adequate amount of divine energy that's necessary for that particular creation to function and to fulfill its purpose on this earth. So a tree gets a certain amount of energy, a human being gets a different type of energy, and each creation and that's true as well in the spiritual realms, that every angel, every soul receives the specific divine energy that's necessary for it to function in this world and to be able to fulfill its purpose. So what does it mean that one can comprehend this in the natural soul and in the animal soul? The idea is very simple, and that is that when I say simple, I don't mean that we all naturally do it, but we have the capacity to do it. So let me think of an example. Take your particular profession. I'm trying to think, something came up last week, forgetting exactly the context, but let's say you're an attorney. Good morning. Let's say you're an attorney and a legal issue comes to you. So the person who's not an attorney or a new attorney has to really dig into it to understand what the matter is and then to connect with it and so on. But if you've been an attorney for a long time in a particular area of law for a long time, you look at the situation and you immediately connect with it. You feel it. You don't necessarily even have to understand it. You feel the circumstance, or perhaps in the field of medicine, right? If you're a doctor and a patient comes into you with a particular situation, if you're a doctor for a long time, you immediately know what's going on for the person. In the field of science, if you specialize in botany, let's say, and a flower or some other kind of plant comes your way, you don't have to think very deeply. You know everything about it. You connect with it. So we have the ability, by virtue of the fact that God makes himself available to us in this manner of God filling the earth, God makes himself available to us to actually feel God. It's part of who we are. We can feel it viscerally. But that's because, number one, we have a godly soul. And number two, God makes himself available to us in this manner where he fills the world. Now, this is distinct from the second idea, the second meditation, which is middle of 26, 27, as God encompasses the world, and surely as God is higher than encompassing the world, a person has the capacity to comprehend these things, and he uses an interesting expression, in a commendably settled state, right? We have the ability to integrate these ideas, and he puts in parentheses in Hasidic texts, whenever a Yiddish expression is used, it's meant to make us really feel it. So if you don't know Yiddish, it might not work, but I'll use it anyway. Belashon Yiddish, in Yiddish, a guter leg. A guter leg means it settles nicely for us, right? So if anybody has something that might settle nicely for them in this regard that they want to share, no pressure.
That we find settling?
That you connect deeply with without necessarily needing to intellectualize it. No pressure.
I guess something comes to mind, but I don't know if anybody else will. That it's comforting that things can and will get worse.
Interesting. Okay.
Quite Scandinavian, but
okay, so we have as God fills the world where we can feel viscerally, and he's very careful in the words that he uses, that when we talk about God as he encompasses the world, we can allow for it to settle nicely within us. But where are we settling that? Bechabad, in the Chabad. Chabad is an acronym for Jewish outreach. No, I'm just kidding. Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, and Das, three intellectual faculties. Chachma, wisdom; Bina, understanding; Das, knowledge. The nefesh Elokis, of the godly soul. So let's break this down for a minute. We can know spiritually certain realities about God. There's a fellow, making sure he's not here right now. He's not here right now, who reached out to me recently that he's married to a non-Jewish woman, his non-Jewish children, did very little Jewishly growing up. He didn't even know what a mezuzah was. That's how distant he was from Judaism. But in this post-October 7th world, he came in touch with his Jewish identity and now wants to connect with it. That's the idea that it settles in our godly soul. We may experience some awareness around this. Stanley, I think Alvin is sitting there. You don't want to sit too close to the fire. You can sit next to me, or you can sit across from me. That's a godly awareness of the presence of God, or the identity of the Jew, as opposed to the first meditation, which is God as he fills the world. We can actually feel viscerally that relationship with God. And if you don't fully comprehend that, give it some time. We're going to touch on these topics, and it'll become more, you'll become more connected to it. Now, in our prayers, who knows what is the foremost of Jewish prayers? Shema. The Amidah comes in a close second, but the Shema is the foremost of prayers. So in our prayers, we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The rabbis added, before we say the next passage in the Torah of, you shall love Hashem your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul, etc., the rabbis added another passage, which is Baruch Shem, Kivod Malchuso Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of the glory of God's kingdom, forever and ever. And that's based on an exchange that Jacob had with his sons prior to his passing. He was concerned that they would not stay faithful to the Jewish faith. And so he challenged them on that, and they responded, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. In other words, we will remain faithful. And as a complement to their passage, he responded, Blessed is the name It was thanking God. Thank God that my children get the program. So, but these two verses carry within them these two ideas. Top of 28, 29. The Hain is Baininus. This is the meditation of Pasuk Rishon V'Sheni de Kriya Shema, the first verse and the second verse of the Shema. Let's identify what that means. So when we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," that's a very personal type of experience. The Shema says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is one." It doesn't say the Lord is singular. So when I say one, you say two. It would seem that the Shema should say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is singular," because there's only a singular God. There's no space for a second God. So why does the Shema say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is one," which would indicate that there's space for a second? The idea is that when we say one, we actually are recognizing that God's oneness, God's singularity, is manifest in the fragmentation of existence. To us, it appears that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the reality is, if you break that down, if you dig into any part of the fragmentation, you're going to find the same singular God.
You said it.
If you look at a stone, you look at a tree, you look at a person, you look at an idea, and you dig down into it, what are you going to find at its core? You're going to find God. And the God that you find that's at the core of a stone is no different than the God that you find at the core of a person. So the idea is that God is very personal in this dimension. So our proclamation here is that we comprehend Shema. Hearing is different than seeing. Seeing, there's a knowing about seeing, but hearing means it's very personal. We connect deeply with it. So we say Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, Hashem, the name of God, which represents God as he is transcendent, Elokeinu, and the God as he is immanent, Hashem Echad, they are the same one God. So this is the idea of God as he fills the world. As God fills the world, we have that capacity to hear it, to own it, to internalize it, to make it very real for ourselves. So that's God as he fills the world. The second passage, blessed is the name of God, the kingdom, the glory of God's kingdom forever and ever. That's already an abstract idea. The glory of the kingdom of God forever and ever, the idea of forever and ever, the idea of something being infinite is something we may relate to scientifically, but we don't really know what that is. We live in a very finite world with a very finite consciousness. So what is this idea of God being infinite? And what is the glory of God? And what is God's kingdom? These are things that are abstract. But yet, when we say them, I suspect that for all of us, if not for most of us, we connect with that idea, even if we don't really own it. We connect with the idea that God is infinite, and that God's infiniteness is perhaps beyond our comprehension, but we can, through adequate contemplation, we can allow for that idea to settle within us. What part of us is connecting with that? That's the godly soul.
Are you on Baruch shame?
Yes.
Shame is kind of gives it a certain remoteness too.
Yes. Yes.
That I'm curious about.
So your name happens to be Stanley, but what happens if your name was Mark? Would you be a different person? You wouldn't. So what is your name about? Your name is not really for you. Your name is really for others. It's something outside of yourself, but at the same time, the name connects deeply with you. In fact, it's brought down in the teachings of Jewish mysticism that when somebody passes out, when somebody faints, you say their Hebrew name, because the soul is connected to the Hebrew name, and it's a way to activate the person from within. We have a daughter who, when she was younger, used to pass out a lot. It's a shtick that kids do. I don't know if anybody has seen this, but she would start crying and then she'd pass out. So the first few times we did it, we freaked out, took her to a neurologist to make sure everything was okay with her. And the neurologist said, she's cool. This is just the thing that kids do. But it still freaked you out every time. So we would immediately say her name and the daughter of her mother's name. That's a way to activate the core. So to the point that it's not something we can really grasp in a very visceral way, but we know we're touching on something. I'll give you another example, maybe a little bit iffy whether we can draw the parallel here, but everybody remembers where they were on October 7th. And when we heard that news, what was going on there was a profound, we were torn apart. And this was about people we don't know, we don't have a connection to. What connected us to them? Why were we touched so deeply about people we had no relationship with? And rationally, it's really hard to explain that. You can't really explain that. But there's a deep connection that we felt in the deepest part of who we are that connected us to others simply because we share a common soul. Because we hear of other massacres. I'm sure we've heard the numbers are unknown exactly. But in Iran, the latest study that I saw was 16,500 people killed and something like 35,000 people wounded, right? It's terrible. It's a massacre. It's tragedy, but it doesn't touch us the same way. We're bothered by it, right? But we slept okay last night. We didn't sleep okay after October 7th. There's something about the deep connection that a Jew has with a fellow Jew that touched us in a very deep way. That is a godly soul experience that we can feel in our bodies, but it's different than our comprehension of our relationship with God. And that's the distinction he's making here, and that's the distinction between the two opening verses of the Shema. Does this make sense? Does this settle well? Is it settling well for you? Yes? Okay. So those are two meditations. Furthermore, his baininus pratius, we can also contemplate his baininus pratius, hashayachim lamidas pratius, particular meditations that connect to particular emotions. For example, im his baininus hamaoireres es ava, perhaps it's a meditation that arouses love within oneself towards God, or contemplation that arouses a person's awe for God. So again, let's use a few examples from the prayer. I shared the teaching last week that don't trust in the noble, in the Son of Man who has now no salvation, because when the spirit leaves, on that day, all of their machinations are lost, right? That's the teaching that I shared last week. So when we think about it, that's a passage in the prayer. When you think about that, immediately you identify with a personal struggle. I'm getting caught up in this job that I'm trying to get, or I'm caught up in a business deal that I'm trying to work out. And you read that passage and you say, whoa, slow down. God's in control. God's in charge. I'm going to be okay. Things are going to work out exactly as God wants, right? Or you can meditate on the passage in the prayer which talks about the fact that God praise God from the mountaintops, from the depths of the sea, and so on and so forth. It says that the God makes sure that the young lion has its food. God makes sure that all of creation is tended to. And we begin to think, yeah, I look around my life, I could always want more, but I'm okay. I got stuff. God's taking care of me, right? That's very personal, and that awakens within us, depending on who the person is. It awakens with us gratitude or love for God, appreciation, or perhaps if your temperament is one that's maybe a little bit more on the contemplative side, perhaps your response is, wow, I better start doing what God wants, right? Or God is so awesome, he's so powerful. Or as we continue in the prayer and we talk about we move from God's manifestation, the physical reality in our earth, to the galaxies, and then we move into the space of the angels. The angels gather, we quote from Ezekiel, where he ascended to heaven and he saw the angels and they proclaimed, "Holy, holy is God," and so on and so forth. So now that moves us also, depending on our personality. Either that makes us feel close to God, or it makes us feel in awe of God, right? We can use, even though we don't have a lot of royalty in countries anymore, the royal system doesn't really work. Even in England, it's really more performative. I've shared the story before, but a few summers ago, my wife and I went to England, and then we went from England, we went to Scotland, right? Scotland. And so we went to, as they like to say, Edinburgh. I have to say it that way, Edinburgh. We went to Edinburgh, and my wife likes to joke, I'm in charge of travel arrangements, she's in charge of the activities. So we got there very late at night, and we checked into the hotel, and then I get up in the morning, and I went down to the lobby, and I see a bunch of people there dressed in their kilts and their whole uniforms and everything. I said, that's interesting. Like, maybe we picked a day where everybody's getting dressed up. Anyway, in the meantime, my wife is trying to figure out, there are 2 palaces in Edinburgh, and we were trying to figure out which palace we were going to go visit. And there are no tickets available. We went to another site, no tickets available. So I went down to the lobby, and they said, yeah, everything's closed this morning. Why is it closed? Because today is coronation day. So the king had been coronated in the UK, in England, but today, that's part of the tradition, is now the king's getting coronated in Scotland. And they said, okay, so we decided to go out and see the coronation. So the coronation actually takes place in a church, but the streets were blocked up, and people were standing on either side of the street. We pushed our way forward, and a parade began. Horses and different types of soldiers and so on and so forth. And I could actually just get emotional thinking about this moment. There was a car that was driving as part of the parade, and it was one of those, I think they call them the Pope Mobile, right? Where everything is glass. And what's sitting in the car, visible to everybody, is the crown. And I was like, wow, something just took me over. Like, what am I getting moved from? There's something abstract there. And it was actually a moment of like, wow, something powerful is here, right? We were able to see through our cameras zoomed in the king and the princes and the princesses, going into the church. But there was something in that moment that was, wow, that's an amazing thing. There's something awesome about this. And I can't explain that to you. You can try to explain it, you can try to rationalize it, but the rationalization falls short. It's really about, there's something abstract here. So, but experiencing that awakens within a person a response. Now, somebody else might have seen that and said, wow, oh, the great royal family, wonderful, this is so great. You would feel like a sense of joy or connection to it, or you feel a sense of awe. So this is what the Rebbe is telling us, is that in our contemplation, we connect not just viscerally to an idea, we actually can connect viscerally to an emotion of love for God, or an emotion of fear of God. And then he shares one more, v'chein be'inyan hatiferes, as well as, and these are following the emotional structure. The emotional structure starts with chesed, kindness, which is the birth of love, gevura, discipline, which is the birth of awe, and the third of the emotional characteristics is tiferes. Tiferes literally means beauty, and beauty comes from a combination of kindness and discipline. Right? So a picture that's all black is boring. A picture that's all white is boring. But when you put the right amount of white and the right amount of black, suddenly beauty comes out. And of course, if you add other colors, it can really be a beautiful painting, a beautiful picture. So what is tiferes in this context? So if chesed is love, meaning it evokes love for God, gevura evokes awe of God. So what does tiferes evoke? What is this idea of beauty? So he says it's a yearning to gaze at the king's glory. It's not even an emotion of connection or disconnect. It's just wow. It's just wow. Perhaps that was my experience of the crown. It's just wow. There's something, you just want to look at it. You just want to see it. You don't even want to necessarily process it. You just want to be in the moment. And we're going to come back to this idea in a little bit. But first, we're going to explore some parentheses. The fifth Rebbe, this discourse is from the fifth Rebbe. The fifth Rebbe was known for his parentheses. His teachings, then he would have parentheses, and sometimes, and we may even have some here, parentheses within parentheses. Okay? So let's flow into the parentheses, the middle of 28. Stanley, you have to, oh, Stanley stepped out. There's a Yiddish expression that we had in the Talmud class, which is you have to halt cup. Halt cup means you have to hold your head. You have to maintain the stream. The stream is going to go different ways. You got to hold your head as we flow through the stream of ideas. Stanley, we just quoted halt cup. Remember halt cup from the Talmud class? You have to halt cup. You have to hold your head. So you have to halt cup. It's like this. Ima yoistachol his boininus teva va'amitis beprati inyan eliki be'ezein sheyia. Indeed, any thorough contemplation, any true contemplation on any godly aspect, whatever it might be. Ubefrat be'inyan gedulase v'roim muse v'hafla us our ein sof baruch hu, and particularly when we're talking about God's greatness and his exaltedness and the wondrous quality of the infinite light of the Blessed One. Anytime we are contemplating God's awesomeness, God's greatness, God's exaltedness, it all of those evoke within us a certain sense of wanting to gaze at God's glory. Right? It doesn't make a difference what it is. When we're talking about God's greatness, it all, in a certain sense, overwhelms us and pulls us to want to be connected to it. What is that experience when we want to gaze at something as a result of an intellectual process? That is the gazing of the intellect of the godly soul in an intense manner. I'm sorry, b'yoker in the richness, umailas ha'or liki, and the superior quality of divine light, v'kar tferes gedulas evreim, and the glory of his the exaltedness of the beauty of his greatness and his exaltedness. Asher kochushav misbatlim behistaklusois, where all of the person's faculties become absorbed in this gazing. She'enei margishes atzmei, where one does not feel themselves. I'll explain in a minute. And there is a great pleasure in this gazing. That pleasure is the sweetness and the delight of the soul, that it delights on godliness. Like the verse says, then you will delight in God. But it's not a felt pleasure in the sense that we're caught up in the experience of the pleasure. But what actually happens is that the pleasure is such a profound pleasure that we get lost in the experience. So let's break this down a little bit. It's important to draw a distinction between body and soul in this conversation. The body feels pleasure on a very visceral level. A good steak, a good bath, We enjoy it. Our body feels and is absorbed in the experience. And being absorbed in that experience is, I'm not going to say selfish, but it's very self. I am enjoying the bath. I am enjoying the steak. When the godly soul, and that's because the body, AKA the animal soul, its whole identity is self-interest. As soon as a child is born, we begin to see that self-interest. From the moment of birth, the child says, feed me, change my diaper, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I want, I need. It's very animalistic in that way. Not animalistic like we are like animals, but we are like animals in that way. We're interested in survival. We want to make sure we feel good. And so as we get older and perhaps our palates become a little more sophisticated, the only difference is that instead of, sitting at a high chair and stuffing our face and making a mess of ourselves, we sit at a table with a napkin around our shirt and sit with a fork and knife and cut into the steak. And we become even more sophisticated. Oh, that music. Oh, that's really good music, right? Or that art. Wow, that's beautiful art. But it's the same experience. It's the same experience of the body finding pleasure in things that serve the self. And granted, there is a difference between the pleasure of food to the pleasure of an intellectual idea. Surely an intellectual idea is more removed from the person than the steak, but it's still, I enjoy this intellectual idea. So therefore I'm invested in that idea. The godly soul, by definition, has no self-interest. It doesn't even have a self-identity. The entire identity of the godly soul is God. And that's its only consciousness. And everything that the godly soul does is about its connection with God. So when the body experiences viscerally how God's creation serves me, it evokes love. And what's the result of that love? That I want to connect with God. When the contemplation of prayer evokes awe, again, it means that I want to be connected to this awesome being, not necessarily in a way of being absorbed into it, but being able to experience it. And so the Rebbe is saying is that in a certain sense, both of those experiences are also about wanting to gaze at God's glory. But the difference is that the pleasure that's experienced in those two experiences, distinct from the third experience of Tiferes, of beauty, which is only about gazing at God's glory, is how that pleasure is felt by me. Whereas the third level, when we're talking about gazing at God's glory, that is the dominant result, the pleasure, I'm not even interested in the pleasure. I'm not experiencing my pleasure. I'm experiencing being lost in the gazing of God's glory. I'm trying to think of an example of this, and what's coming to mind is if you're an artist and you walk into the Louvre and you look at a fascinating painting, you just stand there in awe, right? The reality is that that's also a body experience, but we can identify that. Why are you gazing at that thing? What are you gazing at? Why did you suddenly get quiet? And you're going to try to explain it to somebody who doesn't appreciate art, they're not going to know what you're talking about. But you experience the art in such a profound way that you get lost in it. Somebody was telling me they went to a concert last week with Yoel Levy. He used to be the head of the Atlanta Symphony, and he sat in for someone. I don't know if anybody heard about this. So, and it was a piece of music that he had never. They actually. So what this person told me, that he's very close with Yoel Levy, and he said that oftentimes there's a lot of music out there, and Yoel Levy's going to lead to conduct a symphony. So on the plane over, he reads the musical notes, and he reads the notes, which that itself is mind-blowing. And then he reads the notes and he gets what it's all about. And then he formulates in his mind how he's going to conduct. So in this particular concert, he was backstage, and they came in and said, "This is the piece that we're playing." It's a piece that he never conducted before. He had never heard it before. And he had just a short amount of time to get connected to the music. And he did, and he went out there. And this man told me that you can see that he was so connected to the music. He lived the music in his conducting of the symphony. And he said, like, by the end of the symphony, he was what do they call it? He was in a state of rapture, right? He was like totally into it. He owned the music. There was no him in the music. There was one being, right? He got lost in it. That's what it means to experience godly pleasure, where you get lost in the experience. And I think perhaps the closest we might get to this would be at the high point of Yom Kippur, right? Where our bodies are completely broken down from fasting, and we're tired and we're hungry. And you come into the final prayer of Ne'ilah of Yom Kippur, and you're just in the moment. Maybe just for a moment you experience this connection that you just want to get lost in it. So this is the distinction. So what the Rebbe is saying here is that really any contemplation that evokes an emotional response, in a certain sense, is like gazing at the glory of God. But there's something unique when the emotion is the emotion of tiferes, of beauty, of harmony, of compassion, that the gazing there is not about my experience of it, it's about me being lost in it. Does this make sense? I know that that's a pretty deep and abstract concept, but I think we can connect with it a little bit.
It suggests to me, and maybe others, Eastern religions, where you lose your sense of identity and kind of merge with this oneness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similar?
It's similar, yeah. And what's interesting is that where were we just studying this? I don't know if maybe it was in yesterday's class, but the objective of prayer actually is to bring ourselves to a place of wanting to lose ourselves. The objective is that we should be so caught up in the experience of the divine that we actually want to expire. The key is not to expire. The key is to bring it back. King Solomon says, Imratz libcha, if your heart runs, shuv le'echad, return to the one. In other words, this is the process. By the way, this is, we had this in an earlier discourse also, the heartbeat, which is a manifestation of the heartbeat of existence. This is how God created the world, where there's a yearning and a returning. Everything in life, where does time come from? Some of you may recall we had this in a discourse. Where does time come from? Time comes from this tension, a movement out and a return, a movement out and a return. If there was just a movement out, there would be no time. In order for there to be 1 second to 2 seconds, there has to be something in between. So there's a yearning and a returning. How do we know a person's alive? If there's the yearning and the returning, a systolic and a diastolic movement. You have to have both. But prayer's goal is to bring us to a place, they don't own the word, so I'm going to say it, to a place of rapture. It's our word, right? And in Hebrew, it's called klois hanefesh, which means the ending of the soul, the expiring of the soul. Rabbi Taub, in his Tanya class, and he qualifies it. He says that this is, you're going to hear the term for a second, and it's going to sound strange. He says the body is preoccupied with self-preservation. And what is the soul preoccupied with? Self-annihilation. The soul doesn't want to be stuck in the body, doesn't want to be stuck in the consciousness of the body. So what is the whole soul's yearning? To not, to be not, to not exist. Not, it's not, its objective is not to not exist. Its objective is to not exist. It wants to be lost in the divine consciousness. It doesn't want to have any self-identity. We, at times, want to lose our identity. That's why maybe you say l'chaim, or other behaviors, right? That we try to lose our consciousness, because life is tough. It's hard to be in this tension, this back and forth tension. So in a certain sense, we say, I want to lose myself into something bigger than me. But the soul's whole identity is to want to lose itself. And this is a good segue to make another point. You have a question? Go ahead.
Just add something to that. I used to work as a chaplain. And before I'd enter a room, I'd pray, like, God, all thee, not me. And sometimes I would go into a room and I would ask a question. I think afterwards, how did I know to ask that question? Like, it did not come from me, because there's no way I could have known to say what I said. It was really so God. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's profound.
It was really,
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So it's a good segue to make the following point. When we talk about Chabad, Chachma Bina Das, we naturally move to the physical experience of intellectual contemplation, because that's where we live. We live in our head. I think I may have mentioned this last week about the meditation. Did I mention the meditation last week? There's this Rabbi Yaakov Kirsch who has these meditations, and he has this one meditation which I really love. I listen to it a lot, where he says the fact that I am thinking means that I am not my thoughts. There's an I that's thinking. But we don't think about that. We don't think about the fact that I'm not the thinking, right? Who was it that said, I think, therefore I am? Thank you, right? So the thinking, I don't think about the fact that I'm thinking. I just think. Who's thinking, though? The body is thinking. The brain is thinking. The brain belongs to the animal soul. The soul, but we have the concept of intellect on a spiritual level as well. The soul itself thinks. It doesn't think like we think, because it doesn't have a brain. It has a different mechanism, which we can't at all put our heads around. But the soul thinks. Like the prophet says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. It doesn't mean that God's thoughts are much bigger than our thoughts. It means that God doesn't think the same way we think. It's different in kind. So the soul has capacity, the 10 attributes that the body has, the 3 intellectual and 7 emotional, the soul had them before the body had them. They're built into the spiritual cosmos. When the soul comes into the body, it becomes limited by the body, so that the soul can only think in a conscious way, meaning that we can experience the soul's thinking. We can only experience the soul's thinking through our body. But the soul continues to think. The soul continues to have intellect. That makes sense? And therefore, in the text, when we read about that the soul is experiencing the godly intellect, and we want to say, okay, well, why am I not experiencing that? The answer is because the soul has its own intellect. Because the soul lives inside of us, we can connect with the soul's intellectual experience, not in an intellectual way, but in a way that pushes us to want to gaze at the glory of God. That's what he's telling us here. Yes.
Do you say godly soul in Hebrew? Is it neshama, ruach, or yeshia?
So those are 5 levels of the godly soul. In a general sense, we call it the nefesh elokis, which means the godly. Elokis is Elokah, God. The godly soul, as opposed to nefesh habahamis, which comes from the word behema, the animal soul. So those different, the soul has 5 levels: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. Those are 5 dimensions to the soul. But as a general rule, we're talking about the nefesh elokis, the godly soul.
If you're looking at something beautiful and you're connected to the beauty, and then somebody comes and pisses you off, how do you stay in the beauty and not go to that?
So the fact is that if, depending on the level of connection you have with that experience, you will transcend, the person will be irrelevant to you. Which is actually a good way of explaining. If I'm looking at that painting and I'm a student, so what am I looking at? I'm in awe of it, but what I'm actually looking at is the colors, and I'm looking at the lines, and I'm trying to understand it. I'm not lost in it. I'm intellectually lost in it, but I am not lost in it. So therefore, if somebody comes along and challenges it intellectually or on an emotional level, I'm going to be responsive to that. But if I'm actually in a state of rapture, if I'm totally absorbed in it, I won't even hear the other person. We gave this was in the context of the Torah portion yesterday, but there's a famous study that was done where they took a bunch of people and they told them to focus, a basketball game, to focus on the players, and they're focusing, and then they said, "Did you see the gorilla run across the court?" And they didn't. They replayed it, and now they saw the gorilla running. Somebody dressed up in a gorilla outfit ran across the court. Right? They were so caught up in looking at the players that they didn't notice the gorilla. So Rabbi Levi, my son-in-law, told me yesterday that he went online to try to find this video. Right? So the first video that came up, he played it. And he's watching it, and sure enough, he sees the gorilla come across. He said, "Oh, they don't." And then the video ends and says, "You were so preoccupied with looking for the gorilla that you didn't notice how the colors in the back of the screen constantly changed, and all these other things that were going on." Right? You were so absorbed in the thing that you were looking for or looking at that you missed all the other stuff going on. Right? So it's the same principle. Obviously, that's a mind game. But the principle is, if you're truly absorbed in the gazing, then you're truly lost in it. You don't. I'll give you another, also a very fascinating idea. There was I think it was Rabbi the Rebbe of Chernobyl, who once needed surgery, and he didn't want to be in an artificial altered state of mind at all in his life. But he needed the surgery, and the doctor said, "We got to put you under." He said, "I'm going to sing a nigun, I'm going to sing a Hasidic tune, and you'll see that at a certain point I'm completely absorbed, and then you could perform the surgery." And he sang this nigun, and he was so absorbed, and they didn't even realize that didn't feel the pain of the surgery, right? So that was a state of rapture. He completely got lost in the connection. It wasn't just a rock and roll song. He was caught up in the spiritual components of the nigun, that he was totally lost in the experience, that he didn't feel his body anymore, right? So I think I've exhausted the topic, but I think we get the idea that you could be, and that's the distinction. You can feel love of God, and in that love of God, you're caught up in God, and you're gazing at the glory of the King, but you're still experiencing the self in the love, or the self in the awe. And then there's this third dimension, that the contemplation brings us to a place where we're totally absorbed in the experience of God. I'll tell you something else fascinating. There's an instruction that after prayer, the Mishnah says that after prayer, the next place you go after prayer is, anybody? from the house of prayer to the house of study. And then the Mishnah gives us the schedule for the day, from the house of prayer to the house of study, and from the house of study to the morning bread. And then one goes about their business. Why do we have to go from the house of study to the house of prayer to the house of study? Because we need a transition from the intensity of prayer. Which emotion is one most susceptible to after prayer? Which negative emotion? What do you think? Give me another one. Give me another one. Anger. Anger comes from intolerance. When you're so absorbed in God, and then you come back to earth, so to speak, you become very intolerant of those around you, because you just were in a different dimension. So from the house of prayer to the house of study is a way for us to ground ourselves, because study is typically in physical things. You study Mishnah, you study Talmud. It's very physical. It's about the laws of how we live our lives, and it could be very mundane, but it's godly mundane. So it's a transition, and then we go and eat bread and really ground ourselves, and then we can go out into the world and carry the positive energy of prayer into the world. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Middle of 31.
Anger is, I have so seen that, like, it's, you find yourself getting irritated and like, how could I go from this? And now everybody, like, everything is getting on my last nerve.
Yeah.
And you like, what's wrong with me? No, that's a thing.
Yeah.
I have absolutely seen that.
And it's true not just in prayer, it's true whenever we have an intense experience. When you're coming down from an intense experience, it becomes very difficult to be with others around us. Okay, second parentheses within parentheses, middle of 31. Va'avoda zu hu inyan etzem dvekas sichle belakus. Avoda, which we mentioned last week, avoda means, the word avoda comes from the word eved, which means a servant. So service, but the word avoda in the Mishnah also comes from the word oros avudin, which means worked through skins. So if you buy yourself a nice leather jacket, or you have a leather throw, that leather, they didn't just pull it off the animal and wash it. They worked it. It needs to be worked with oils and beaten and, pressed and pushed and so on. It takes, good leather is really, really worked through, not just from a good animal, but it's really, really worked through. And the idea here is that for us, this prayer is called avodas hatfila. This discourse is based on the concept of avodas hatfila, the service of prayer. The service of prayer is not just showing up and saying a bunch of words. You got to work it. You got to work hard within yourself to bring yourself to this place. So what is this work? What is this service? This is the work of cleaving one's intellect in the divine, in the godly. Which is even higher than intellectual arousal or intellectual excitement, right? You can be exploring an intellectual idea. You're sometimes sitting around with people, and somebody brings up a topic that they're really excited about, they're really passionate about, right? Maybe for some of us older folk, you're sitting around younger people, and they're talking about AI, and they're talking about, wow, AI this and AI that, and you say, what are you guys so excited about? Like, okay, it's cool, but chill out. It's not that exciting, right? Or you're sitting around with people and they get excited about politics, or they get excited about some new scientific discovery. That's intellectual excitement. And then you have you have emotional excitement, which is we can all identify with. So the service, the work of prayer is to get excited, but surely not emotional excitement, not even intellectual excitement. I'm going to skip the next parentheses for a moment. Although ultimately this gazing, this excitement does get experienced by the heart, but it's not the heart that's excited. It trickles down to the heart, but it's actually the soul is excited. The soul is absorbed in the moment. Like the verse says, this is from Ecclesiastes, from King Solomon, where he says, "V'libi ra'a harbe chachma." Listen to the words. My heart saw a lot of wisdom. Why is the heart seeing? And why is the heart seeing a lot of wisdom? Wisdom doesn't live in the heart. The point is, that in that experience where the heart sees a lot of wisdom, the heart and the mind become fused. In the experience, in the being absorbed in the gazing of God. Yes.
I just made a comment that recently they found that the heart has some neurological connection to the brain. That in Judaism, they say the seat of a person's consciousness is his heart. That some religions believe that the heart is a center of consciousness. Now, they're doing heart transplants, and that heart transplant patient gets the emotional or consciousness of the other person that used to have that heart. And they found there's a nervous system in the heart, and it's kind of, to say what you were saying about the heart sees, it's unusual to say that there is a actual neurological or brain heart connection to that.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. The da'as, so you have chachma, bina, wisdom, understanding. Da'as, knowledge, is actually not intellectual. Ultimately, it's not intellectual, it's experiential. When you know something, you don't actually have to understand what it is, you know it, right? You don't have to know why you're alive, but you feel it viscerally. So there is definitely that connection. He says, V'hu inyan ta'alumas leiv. This is what we call the recesses of the heart. Pnimius halev, the innermost dimension of the heart. Shaha'ar eliki meir ba'imik meichev libay, that the light, the godly light, shines in the depths of the brain and of the heart. And notwithstanding that the light shines in a revealed way in the recesses of the heart, nonetheless, there is no visible excitement or a manifest change of the emotions, because it's not about the heart. It's not an emotional. The experience is not an emotional experience. The experience is an intellectual experience, but it's even more than an intellectual experience. It's actually a godly experience. I want to read a passage from Hayom Yom. We'll close with that. I'm not going to elaborate on it. I just want to read it because it carries this this message really powerfully. If I can find it quickly. Yeah, here. So he says there are three forms of hitbonenut, contemplation or meditation. The first is study meditation. After mastering the concept thoroughly, one meditates on its profundity until the intellectual element shines forth for him. So you study something and then you really think it over. You think it over and over again until you really, the intellectual light of the idea shines for the person. Second is meditation before prayer. This meditation involves sensing the vitality of the concept learned, not the intellectual element as in study meditation. So the goal here is to connect with the energy of the idea, not the idea itself. And the third is meditation in prayer. And this is what we've been talking about. This meditation involves sensing the godliness in the concept learned. He says these three rungs on the ladder of sensitivity, these three are rungs on the ladder of sensitivity. It is only by God's kindness towards us that we may occasionally sense, i.e., experience a penetrating realization of godliness spontaneously without any service at all. So we can sometimes experience that, but that's a gift. This comes about by virtue of the quality of ultimate essential godhood within the soul, as we've been talking. For service by one's own efforts, however, these three forms of meditation are essential. Okay, that's it for today. I ordered 20 books. They should be coming this week, and whoever wants to buy one, they'll be available for purchase next week. And anybody who's new today that wants to be added to the texting list, please take down my phone number and text me, and I'll add you to our texting list. I text every Friday to let everybody know about the class. And finally, don't forget that this week, Tuesday, we begin the new course. Have a